one that actually was.
Good morning, everyone. I'll call the Crow Wing County Budget Committee meeting for October 8th, 2020 to order. To note, Commissioner Coring is in attendance electronically. We appreciate all the other commissioners being in the room. So with that, Mr. Houle, are we starting with your presentation first, which would be the CARES Act?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I think we are. I have one more thing to pass out. You wouldn't believe it, but.
Oh, sure.
So I wanted to walk you through first the phase one and where we're at after our phase one grants. And so the first part of the report will be about phase one and putting a ribbon on that, if you will. The second then is a conversation with you about phase two. What would you like to do with leftover funds from phase one? And Paul, you have a copy of the recommendation, phase two recommendations. So that's what I'm working off of, okay?
Okay.
We had grants, we were awarding grants up to $10,000 for COVID-related expenses for businesses that were affected by one of the executive orders of the governor, and we accepted those applications from August 17th through September 18th. You had allocated $3 million of our CARES Act funds towards that purpose for the for-profit business grants, and you had allocated $1 million of our $8 million allocation to nonprofits in our community. We also solicited grant funds from other cities and towns throughout the county for the use of their CARES Act dollars to have a coordinated program. And I'm pleased to say that we got an additional $665,000 from cities and towns on the for-profit grant program and another $150,000 in the nonprofit grant. What that means is that we had more funds available for those grants. In the initial review, we received and are recommending preliminary approval on 182 applications in the for-profit side, totaling $1.76 million, a little bit more than that. There are 63 applications totaling a little over $500,000 that are recommended for approval in the nonprofit grant program. The not to exceed reference in those numbers is because we have awarded grants based on the application, but there is supporting documentation that has to be submitted in order to justify that number. And so while the grant award is preliminarily approved up to a particular amount, then there's this documentation process that once you guys approve the preliminary amounts, staff will go through the business of, you got to submit your required documentation. If your documentation is short of the grant amount, we issue a check for the amount of the documentation. Okay, so it's not to exceed. So these are the most we will spend in these programs, at least for round one. In both the nonprofit and the for-profit pool, we had applications that were submitted that did not meet the eligibility criteria. In some instances, it was for an organization that was not in Crow Wing County. In some instances, it was multiple applications from one organization. In some instances, it was more than 50 employees. And so any of those eligibility criteria, there were 72 applications in the for-profit pool and 15 applications in the nonprofit pool that were rejected as not meeting the eligibility criteria. We still have a couple, 6 on the for-profit side, 9 on the nonprofit side, that we're still seeking a little bit more information on. So there's a little bit of flux here, but not much. So what we have left after that is the funds in the phase one grant program looks to me to be almost $2 million in the for-profit pool, $1.9 million in the for-profit pool, $560,000 in the nonprofit pool, totaling a little over $2.4 million left in those in that pool of funds available. That's still substantial, and that's still something that I think we can do something with that would be meaningful. And so I'm going to pause there because I've handed out then copies of the spreadsheets that show each of the approved, each of the not approved. And what I am proposing is that on your board meeting on the 13th, that we would have on your consent calendar, whatever it is, the consensus is from today about those that are moved forward with preliminary approval or not, so that the full board, and I think this is a good thing for our CARES Act documentation, the full board has endorsed all of the grants. So the subcommittees of you guys split to do the for-profit review and the nonprofit review, and maybe you guys have something you want to report out about that. I'm just giving you the results that have been given to me, but maybe a pause for how we doing in phase one.
Well, I think phase one, and I'm Commissioner Coring, you can pipe in if you wish, but with Tyler and the work that Bladek did prepping for this, our round went very smoothly, I thought. You know, we did have a discussion on a few of the businesses, whether they qualified or didn't qualify, and I think looking at the 6 that we're looking for additional information, I think we're very sensitive to what those businesses wanted and were asking for. I think we all recognized the immediacy of the needs for these funds to get out to these businesses, but I think the businesses were very appropriate in their ask initially. So that would be for the for-profit side. Commissioner Coring, do you have anything to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think you said it just right.
Thank you. The not-for-profit side?
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess I would agree kind of with you in regards to the job that the United Way did and what Kim did in regards to organizing this and following through, and really the work that the agencies have put in. You know, they're putting into the requests with this, and those that did follow directions specifically were much easier to approve also. I would, Mr. Chair, also though like to hear from Tyler and Kim in regards to their overall observation of this too.
Okay, Commissioner Franzine?
I think it went very well. We approved many upon receiving, the proper documentation. But one of them had sent in quite a bit of documentation, and we went through and crossed things out, and I've already talked to our finance director, and that was the Salvation Army, and they had 9820 that they had sent in for documentation that we approved, but I would like to take that back up to the $10,000, because I'm sure they probably have more. Just because all of the others who didn't send in the proper documentation, we left at 10,000.
Right.
So I'd like to leave them, and Nick and I have already talked about it. So that's just a change that I would like to make on this for when we approve. Do you agree with that, Bill?
Yes.
And I would like to also acknowledge the county staff that worked on these applications too, and the work that they put into it. So appreciate that very much. So Mr. Houle, if there's, I think we can move on to the phase 2 recommendations.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, I just want to make sure I'm clarifying that we understand correctly which one you're referring to. It's the Salvation Army that's currently listed at 9820, correct? Mm-hmm. And that would go up to 10 grand.
Yeah.
And that's the recommendation from both of you, okay? So we'll make that modification. This would be...
Tim?
Yep.
I also realized that I made an error on the on your spreadsheet, the Cross Lake Common Goods Bridges of Hope. I had accidentally put that as did not qualify. They did qualify, and it was at $10,000. So the total request dollars was 609. 6 now with the update with the Brainerd Salvation is $610,000 and $9. So $610,009.
Mr. Chair, just to double check with the folks who are making the recommendation, Commissioner Brecken, Commissioner Franzine, is that square with what your recollection is as well?
Yes.
If it is, then that becomes the recommendation moving forward for anybody else's comment.
I think we're good on that. Do we, Mr. Hu, do we want to have a consensus on these initial ones then, before we move to phase 2?
I don't plan to bring forward those that are not being awarded. I'm planning to bring forward those that are being awarded. We would send letters to those who are not being awarded. I have the sample letters in front of you in both cases. The award letters are, of course, signed by the board chair. The rejection letters are not.
So you'd like to have a consensus from us that this will go through on the consent agenda?
Yes, please.
Commissioner Coring, do you approve pushing the ones that we have preliminarily approved to the consent agenda on the 13th?
Yes, that sounds,
Commissioner Brecken?
Yes.
Commissioner Hoag? Commissioner Franzine?
Yes.
And likewise for the chair. We should move those forward.
Mr. Chairman, we will move those forward on your agenda for the 13th. Moving on then, what is the board's direction about what we have left over for those CARES Act grants? Now, mind you, you could use those for economic assistance grants. You could use those to reimburse Crow Wing County. You could use those for any variety of purposes. We've contemplated that you would still, at least at first, keep that in the realm of economic assistance grants. And so what we have is a recommendation for you, and you can think about it as it's an idea, and you got a couple of variations on the idea here. One would, and it would be reopening our for-profit and nonprofit applications for an additional shortened 2-week window. We're proposing that would be the week that would run from October 12th through October 23rd. That's the 2-week window. And then you can get into these choices about how you wish to expand eligibility criteria. I have 3 examples here, but there's, countless other ways you could choose to do this. You could expand the eligibility criteria to include employers with 51 to 100 employees and change no other eligibility criteria. What that would do is it would make a little bit larger groups available for grants. And I think Tyler's got some stats on that if you're interested in how many businesses in Crow Wing County would fit into that category. And it's kind of loose, but I think he's got a decent handle on it. You could also expand the eligibility criteria to include employers with 0 to 100 employees. And why would you do that since you've already done the 0 to 50? It gives the folks from phase 1 an opportunity to refine their application to be more COVID specific. It gives those an opportunity who may not have completed an application. We've heard from some in the community, I didn't apply because I think others need it more. Okay. It would give folks an opportunity to apply if they hadn't already. So it's like, for the one, it's an expansion. For the other, it's a extension. You could expand the eligibility criteria to include employers without any employee count limits. And you can see that staff was gravitating towards the employee count limits as trying to pick the size of the organization in the community that you were trying to target. And we don't have any corner on the market on what size organization should be targeted. So I'd like you to focus your thinking on where you think the greatest needs are in the community. If we do that, I think we're probably going to be in pretty good shape. We would not, at this point, propose to advertise any further. We did spend quite a bit advertising the first round, and yes, we did still hear from people. I didn't know. I didn't hear. And I think there's, no matter what we do, unless we knock on everybody's door and talk to them individually, we're going to hear that. We would solicit applications, however, with whatever your eligibility criteria are, and through avenues like the United Way, through BLADEC, through the Chambers of Commerce. It would be kind of a, if you didn't get in the first round, here's your last chance, kind of an approach. We would propose to use the same committee structure that was used originally to review whatever grants come in, and we're proposing that group would meet the week of October 26th. Now, keeping in mind our CARES Act deadlines are December 1st. So I think we have time to do one more abbreviated round here, but I don't think we have time to do 2 more abbreviated rounds. And so while that round is open, we're also suggesting simultaneously that you would open an application process to accept applications from any organization that provided free daycare within Crow Wing County for essential workers. That was primarily back in March and April, but it was a significant expense. Mostly that was the school districts, but we also know the local YMCA, and if there are any others who provided free daycare to essential workers. And we would accept those applications during the same period, October 12th to the 23rd. We're also suggesting you could open an application process to accept applications from any public and private schools within the community for any unreimbursed COVID expenses that they have. That could be associated with technology to support distance learning or any other unreimbursed COVID expenses. I do think right now our schools are probably in the greatest challenge, trying to move between learning models and the logistics associated with that. And so I guess I would identify, I'm not sure that you agree, and it's okay if you don't, I would identify that I think our schools are probably experiencing some of the greatest challenges in our community at present. And so trying to do something that would be supportive of their needs. All of which then I would propose holding a special county board meeting on November 3rd at 9 a.m. Think about your groups would get together early the week of October 26th, review your grant application, special board meeting, then on November 3rd at 9, that would be to approve any phase 2 grant applications, to consider and approve any applications for daycare cost reimbursement grants. I expect there to be so few that we can probably just do that openly. And the same with considering and improving applications from area schools for unreimbursed expenses. The remaining CARES Act dollars after these recommendations would be used to reimburse Crow Wing County for its own expenses. You know I've been talking to you a little bit about this presumptive eligibility for public safety and public health. The guidance is becoming clearer that that presumption is in fact a presumptive eligibility, meaning we can use CARES Act dollars to reimburse any public health and public safety expense from March 30th?
March 1.
March 1, all the way through December 31. And we know that that is a significant sum of money. We could probably eat up almost all of the CARES Act allocation just with that one presumptive eligibility. And so we're proposing this phase 2 with these 3 components, and then that's it. We're going to close it out after that using Crow Wing County's allocations or reimbursing ourselves. We will not reimburse ourselves fully for that presumptive eligibility, and it remains to be seen what we would get in these phase 2 applications to determine what would be left, what would fall through. I don't know the answer to that yet, but I think there would be probably still some that would fall through.
So one quick question for Debbie Erickson. Special meeting on the 3rd of November is okay for us to do that since that's the election?
Mr. Chair, the only prohibition on meetings on Election Day is it can't occur between 6 and 8 p.m. So if you have a special meeting at 9 a.m., that is totally fine.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, in regards to that, the eligibility for the nonprofit side, for the profit side, excuse me, is, there's been requests from landlords. Has that been, where are we at with that request?
We have not expanded to include that. We have reached out to both LSS and to LSS and who else? Was it the Salvation Army?
Yes.
Was it? Okay. And asked if they had any need for CARES Act funds associated with rental assistance. They both indicated that they have an active program to do that already. They have resources that they are using for those purposes and did not believe that they had the capacity to do more with additional resources. And so that led us away from doing anything here because I don't want to say the words, that means the needs have been met. I don't believe the needs have been met, but it does mean that there is an existing program that is at capacity in the community already doing it.
Okay. But that helps the renters, but not necessarily anything that the landlords themselves would be looking at.
Yeah, and the way they do that, which I think does help the landlords, is it's a rental voucher. It's not like somebody would go in and get cash to pay their rent, and then God knows if that ends up in the hands of the landlord. No, it's a rental voucher. So it's given to the tenant to give to the landlord to turn in for reimbursement, so that the rent is paid and considered to be paid.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask Tyler, are there any other expansions that we should be looking at?
Oh, thank you very much. I think that some of the items that Administrator Houle mentioned, these are the discussions that we've been having, certainly. The landlord question comes up daily for me. It really does. I'm getting calls I would say at least daily from our property management folks, from our property owners, asking what type of assistance can be provided to them. It's such a challenging question. They're put in a very challenging position just because the language in all of this really precludes them from being eligible. And so that's the hard part, and it's a hard conversation, but it's a conversation you have to have with them, to stating that based on the guidelines that have come down from the federal government, you're, ineligible to receive these funds. Now, they turn around and say, we can't evict anyone, we can't serve papers on anyone, and that's at a state level, that's not at a county level. So that's where my response has gone to them, is stating that this is a state issue, it's not a county issue. The county is not telling them that they can't evict their people. It's the state that's doing that. So, and the guidance that's come from the CARES Act just doesn't allow us to include those. And it's a tough one, because I bet we must have had 6 to 8 of them that came through that were property management services. In regards to the other items that are listed on here, my recommendation, just based on the sheer numbers of employees, would be to go to 0 to unlimited. The number of employers in Crow Wing County that exceed 100 employees is about 36. So there just aren't that many that exceed that 100 employees, but the ones that do are our 2 hospitals, our resorts. So our 3 major resorts, Rutgers, Breezy Point, and Grandview, along with our 2 hospitals, exceed that 100. And so my recommendation would be to say, if we're going to include those, which they have been impacted as well, they should be eligible for some type of funding. I would recommend that we increase the number from 0 to unlimited. Just because we don't pull in that many, but we pull in some that really, really could use the help. The second side of this, in regards to a second round, I think that we have the systems built between the United Way and between Bladek that turning this back on is a matter of it's literally a flip of a switch. We can turn this back on. If we have to change the language a little bit to include the employee numbers, we can do that very, very quickly. So that would be my recommendation. When we turn this back on, we can do it very quickly, and we can certainly, when we met, the way that we are able to categorize those that we already know meet all of the criteria, we put them in one bucket. Then we reviewed those. We review the ones that that we had questions on, and we had tremendous guidance from Commissioner Coring and Commissioner Barrows, along with Debbie, to say these are the ones that just don't fit that. And so that's where those buckets for us came from. Turning this back on would be very easy for us to do, and I think it's the right thing to do. Since the application period ended, I've received 9 applications. 9. People saying, did I miss this? Yes, you missed this, but we expect to turn this back on. So I'm holding on to those. We'll enter those in there immediately. The other thing that we're doing is that, and staff doesn't know this yet, but we've created a flyer, lack of a better term, basically a postcard. And we have cross-referenced the list from our chambers of commerce to the ones that have been already approved, to look at those businesses. And this is the best list we have, is the Chamber of Commerce's, because they have identified their membership base is pretty vast between the 3 chambers in our county, to identify the ones that we know would be eligible that didn't apply. So we are going to literally knock on doors. We are going to walk into these businesses and say, here you go, this is how you do this. You're going to be eligible. You need the assistance. If you miss this for whatever reason, we're really making you aware of it. I walked into last Friday, into the bowling alley in Crosby, and the gentleman had no idea. And that's not, he said, I just don't pay attention to things like this. So I handed him my card and said, we're going to do another round, so this is the way to do this. And I mean, it isn't efficient, but it's what we can do. And I think this is the best way to try and pull in as many more businesses into these small business relief grants that we can. If we get another 100, that would be outstanding. I don't know what we'll get, but this opening it up is the best way to do this. And I think the best bang for our time is certainly to do this and do this efficiently, and we know we can. So that's my...
Tyler, I do have one question on the for-profit side. When we met, you had indicated the number of businesses with employees between 51 and 100. And now you talk about 36. would that be from 51 to,
Unlimited. Yes.
Unlimited?
Yeah, the largest employer to date that we have from the county is Essentia Health. And, but yes, it includes everyone over 50 to 1,000
Okay.
is roughly between 35 and 40, just kind of based on numbers. But
so at this point, we're only talking $360,000 then?
yes, if they all applied. And again, we have essential businesses that fall into that bucket, our large manufacturers that wouldn't be eligible based on the guidance that we have. So you're going to eliminate a bunch of those anyway. But I look at, again, like the resorts, the 2 hospitals, Reichert Bus as an example of someone that was certainly impacted by this. But, when you start looking at our larger manufacturers in the county, they still wouldn't be eligible just based on the guidelines. So the number shrinks down even farther.
Mr. Chair, I want to be clear. We're saying your recommendation would going from 0 to unlimited employees.
Right.
Yeah,
Correct.
cool.
I would like to point out just one thing, and there's a presumption built in. We're proposing that the application period, we would accept applications, would be from October 12th to the 23rd.
Correct.
Today's the 8th, isn't it?
It is.
Today's the 8th. Your board meeting's on the 13th. And so there's a presumption built in that we would start to accept applications before you have approved Phase 2. And so it's important that I understand that there's a consensus today, or we shouldn't go and do that. So I want to point that out to you, and it is because of our compressed timelines that I'm still suggesting we should do it that way, but I want you to know about it.
My question is why do we have to wait until the 13th if we're going to make a presumption right today? Can't we start today?
Yes, we could.
I just, Commissioner Franzine, I just need about 2 hours to update the system. But we can turn it on, and I think Kim has the same capabilities. We can turn that back on within a matter of hours.
Yes, yep.
Kim, do you have anything to share in regards to this?
I'm really liking the further amount of people or employees. I think that's going to allow those larger organizations like LSS, Minnesota Teen Challenge, the YMCA, those bigger organizations to be able to apply and get funding possibly this time. So I'm in total agreement.
Okay, good.
So let me just ask the question then, Commissioner Coring, do you agree with these conditions going from 0 to unlimited on the second round?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I agree with what I've heard so far. Sounds good to me.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Franzine?
I agree.
Commissioner Hoag?
Yep, absolutely.
Commissioner Brecken?
Yes.
And the chair also agrees, so move ahead and we'll take care of business on the 13th.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, I thought the question for Commissioner Coring was as it related to bullet 3 on recommendation 1. And I want to make sure that you are also giving the green light on bullet 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And so looking at those, I can walk through them, but it was the application process for organizations providing free daycare, application process for any public and private schools for additional unreimbursed COVID expenses, holding a special board meeting on November 3rd to deal with those 3 grant programs, and then 5, authorizing staff to close out any remaining CARES Act dollars. That's the ask, and so I just want to make sure that I understand correctly.
And the one other piece is that we'll meet on October 26th
Yes.
to review these also.
Which
So-
I would like, if you can, while you're all together, it makes the most sense to try to schedule that right now. And so,
Okay.
but I do want to make sure that I'm not overreaching.
And I just want to hear Commissioner Coring, because I did not throw all those pieces in there. Commissioner, are you in agreement with all those additional findings, or whatever we call them?
Yes, that was my assumption when Administrator Hull went through it. I guess that's what I was thinking we were moving forward with. So I'm in full agreement.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is we'll set that special board meeting then for November 3rd at 9 o'clock to do our final work on this one, but also meeting on October 26th to review the new applications or additional applications that'll be coming in.
And then, Mr. Chair, could we take just like a 2-minute recess, and the two of you on the nonprofit side come and work with Kim to get it on your calendar, and the Commissioner Coring and Tyler and Commissioner Barrows get it on your calendar? I think it's just going to be smoother if while you're all here, we get that on your calendar, but it's not business for the Budget Committee, it's business for a subgroup. So I'm suggesting about a 2 or 3 minute recess to get that scheduled, and then we'll reconvene.
I will order that we're in recess for 2 minutes.
Kim, Bill, Rosemary?